Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lawrenson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
As Ruth so often says, let's get this conversation started. I had an email recently from somebody who said, Hi, Tom. I'm curious about gratitude and our brains. I've set a reminder each day to give thanks, and I'm finding how much it improves my mood and I think my outlook in general. And this is somebody who actively uses AHA and wondered what you have discovered that you could share to that end. Why? What's going on with the brain? And we're talking about an essential difference between the tsunami of stress and that escalating flight or fight and rational intimacy, and why that is such a very different experience, and the one detrimental and destructive and the other constructive and beneficial. And what is it that sends us down those different paths? Because the seasons have been about rational intimacy.
And I think it's important to note that, I've heard about the gratitude thing before. It's one of those things of, practice 30 days of gratitude or something like that.
Count your many blessings.
Yeah. But the reason, and it is impactful, I think that is something that is proven to be very impactful if you can live a life of gratitude. But I think what I'd love us to kind of start with is that we've got to get to the place where we can be full of gratitude, right? It doesn't come in necessarily in an instant way. And what is behind that? What is the backstory, I guess, of a pathway to the place of
what is happening in the brain.
Yeah, what's happening? It's not just like willpower, but what is actually happening in the brain. So to start off with, and it's to shape this conversation around how do we get to a place of being in that. It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Being in a place where every day we're thankful and grateful for everything. How do we get there? And what are those starting points that can either get us there or not? Yep. And we wanted to talk about two words, really, which I think are really interesting words. One is what's it look like to be a secure person? And the other, the opposite, is what it looks like to be someone who's perceiving life or the world around them or the people around them as a threat. And they're these starting points that have very, very different outcomes in the brain, but also in the place of how we live out life, how we perceive life. So talk to me about that, Tom.
Secure versus insecure.
Yeah.
And how much perception simply dominates that and affects it. So when we have experienced relationships or situations that have been threatening, have been demoralizing, have been challenging, have been communicating negative self-image, parent saying constantly you're stupid, or what's wrong with you, or you can't have that emotion, or you shouldn't, or whatever it is, or comparisons with friends, and they're so much more attractive or intelligent or whatever it is. All these kind of things feed into either feeling secure or insecure. And that can build up, and then there is this, as we've talked about, a lack of homeostasis. It's negatively affecting neurobiological function. Things are not operating well. And if things aren't operating well neurobiologically, we're probably going to have negative, unsuccessful experiences. And we're not at our best, which just feeds all of that. Regardless of where that came from, with AHA, the brain can normalize the stress and trauma. But that's not the only source of sensed or perceived threat. We can sense or perceive a threat where it doesn't even exist simply because of the way we're thinking about it. Does that follow?
Yeah, it's part of our perceptions or our seemingly rational perceptions.
Exactly. And seemingly rational perceptions perceive threats where they don't actually exist.
Can I just step back a little bit? I'm thinking about security, and we'll get to, because I think where I love where you're going, but I'm thinking about security, and I've just a memory just popped into my head.
Okay.
So I want to share it with you. But I remember, I think I was like maybe 19 years old, and I went to this family that I knew of, and I went there for Sunday lunch one time, and this family was just kind of like, I don't know, they spent a lot of time together. They were just like, I saw them, and I remember and we had a great Sunday lunch and all the rest of it, and they had 4 daughters and who were around my age, so very similar age and stages. And I remember going there as a 19-year-old and thinking, these daughters are secure. And I could see it, and as opposed to myself, who felt completely insecure and all over the place as a 19-year-old young woman. And I think the reason why I say that is because actually there's something about an ecosystem.
Absolutely.
That it's like a self-perpetuating, there's momentum behind it. So the more secure you are, the more secure you can be. It's not to say that probably those girls felt insecure, but compared to me, I felt like they were like the most secure people on the planet,
Yes.
But so I'm sure that everyone has some level of insecurity, but I do think, we're human beings, but I do think that and the reason I bring it up is because actually rational intimacy is kind of like that ecosystem. So once you can get into it and into the patterns of rational intimacy, the more you do, the more secure you'll be, and the more it's a circular motion. But I was just kind of curious because I think there's different stages there for different people, and I think for those girls it was absolutely a product of their environment, not their perceptions necessarily, but that environmentally it gave them some level of security that I didn't have. So what do you think about that?
So with the tsunami of stress, the core issues are feeling insecure and incapable. And when we sense or perceive a threat to well-being, it triggers that insecurity and incapability. So that's a cognitive function. So we're talking, in terms of the brain, we're talking about the cortex, and the back part of the cortex is sensory processing. We sense, we hear, we see, we smell, we do something that takes in sensory information. Somebody says something happens, and the sensory processing part of the cortex and the back part of the top of the head is processing that. What does that mean? What is the significance of that? And then that couples with the front part of the cortex, which is problem solving and decision making and personality expression, and where we're sensing a threat that doesn't actually exist. It's even worse because part of our mind may even know that we're being irrational about it, but we can't help ourselves. And then the solutions we come up with are just more problems. It just makes the situation worse. And then the decisions we make are not healthy, beneficial decisions. All of that gets sent into the limbic system, which is the emotional part of the brain in the middle, and it hits the amygdala. And we have sensed and created a threat that doesn't actually exist, but the amygdala is reactive to it and says, we should have a flight or fight response. The amygdala sends a message into the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic, flight or fight, and we're off into the tsunami. As opposed to...
So that's one entire track.
One track.
So that is when it could be environmental, it could be perceptions, It could be all sorts of stuff, but you are not secure, right?
Right. You're feeling insecure and incapable.
You're insecure, incapable, and you sense stuff in the back of what do you call
back
it?
of the head.
The back of the head.
Yes.
And then that, when all of that is picking up, it comes to the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, and
where you make a decision, and you make a decision off the back of being insecure, which then
and incapable.
Yeah, which then sends you right into the amygdala, which is designed to go, hey, danger. We need to do something. So then the whole thing, it's like a stack of dominoes. It's just all in motion. You are in fight and flight.
Yes.
Okay, so that's one option.
The other is, and why gratitude or whatever it is, these affirmations can be so significant, is because if you combine the activation of homeostasis in the enteric nervous system, part of the autonomic nervous system, you're allowing the brain to normalize that sympathetic flight or fight, get you to that place of where it's neutral and you're okay. Then you can build on that with the sense of perception input. So you're literally, if you say them out loud, especially, your brain is registering that. You're hearing it, you're seeing it written, you're taking in that sensory information, and your brain is processing that. And it's supportive of feeling secure and capable, because the messages, like with gratitude, things that you're grateful for, these are positive things that are in your life. That's affirming of feeling secure. And affirmations, feelings of and perceptions of capability. Now, does that mean that if I am feeding into my brain, I'm an Olympic quality athlete? My mind knows that's not the truth. My brain knows that's not the truth. But does that mean I'm some slug laying on the floor? No, I'm capable. So get up and do some exercise and build on that. So the sensory processing occurs in the back, and that feeds into the front. And it's not just problem solving, it's also potential generating. What can I do with this? I'm not just solving a problem, but I'm also affirming potentiality. And then my decision making will be consistent with that. All of that then goes into the limbic system again. But instead of hitting the amygdala, run away, fight, it hits the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus sends a message into the parasympathetic, which is rest, relax, recover, digest, homeostasis. And the hypothalamus is sending messages in that are affirmations, that are positives, that are empowering, that are generating forward movement and momentum. So, for instance, the hypothalamus will activate cortisol, which is emotional regulation and motivation and sleep and rest and things like that, but also energizing. So it's an entirely different dynamic that's being generated and rewarded and reinforced.
Yeah.
That's neurobiological.
I think it's fascinating, and as you mentioned, cortisol, I guess that's why we have people suffering from adrenal fatigue, but it's really that
which is the opposite of it.
Which is the opposite, yeah. Which is this: they've been stuck in this perpetual cycle, probably, of fight and flight, from this starting with insecure, perceived threat to well-being that kicks off the fight and flight. And then it creates all sorts of problems for people. As opposed to, it does sound wonderful, being in this secure place, and then inside our brains, what's happening is that it sends us into the parasympathetic nervous system, and I think one of the things that I find interesting, Tom, is that I've noticed this where it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I've noticed friends of mine who've been in really insecure situations. So like it might be a work situation where they're just like struggling, or they're not seen for who they are, whatever. And it's almost like they become the worst version of themselves.
Yep.
As opposed to when you're in a secure setting and you just, you're not like looking for loads of affirmation or anything like that necessarily, but you are just in a secure setting. You are accepted for who you are, not more, not less. There is this chance to be a more fully version of yourself. An
authentic version of yourself.
Yes.
And the reason that can find fulfillment is because it's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
That is who you are. You are capable of that. And so rather than the negative anticipation.
And I'd like us to talk a little bit about that negative, because that is it's the follow on from threat, isn't
Absolutely.
it? It's in that fight and flight. It's the tsunami of stress, really, right?
And we have a sense of stress and need. We perceive ourselves, feel insecure and incapable, and then we have a negative anticipation.
Mm-hmm.
We expect something bad to happen.
Mm-hmm.
We expect rejection. We expect a lack of success. We expect failure. We anticipate that. Okay? As opposed to the alternative, which is the actually rational with a sense of secure and capable, then we have a positive expectation. Rather than a negative anticipation,
mm-hmm.
we have a positive expectation. Does that mean?
Yeah,
you hear
totally.
The difference between the two?
And so that positive expectation is grounded in things like gratitude.
Yes.
Right? Because it's like, oh, thank you. I'm grateful. Like that this is the reality of my life. And, you're kind of grounded in more of the present. That's what gratitude does in some ways. It's not thinking about what might be. It's like being thankful for what is now.
That is so critical, yes.
Mm-hmm. And whereas negative anticipation is all that, oh my, what will happen, which we can't predict.
Mm-hmm.
But we think we can predict it in that space, or it feels very real to us.
And this is more than just pessimism and optimism. It's a realistic appraisal. Pessimists don't have a realistic appraisal. But optimists may not have a realistic appraisal either.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about pessimism and optimism. It's about a much more truthful, realistic, rational appraisal of a situation, self, others, situation, that contributes to, supports, reinforces that sense of feeling secure and capable,
mm-hmm.
when nothing in the situation is necessarily different or has necessarily even changed. And then what secure and capable in rational intimacy, in that sense of contentment. And remember, contentment isn't everything is wine and roses. Everything's wonderful. No, contentment is a sense of, I'm content. Is there stress and need? Always. But I'm content.
Mm-hmm.
And then that becomes an opportunity. That then, in rational intimacy, moves from contentment, that first stage, into the second stage of grace, where there is emotional poise and energy and gifting, building on living out the capability. Because we feel secure, we're also capable. And because we're secure, we have a sense of emotional poise. But then along with that is the gifting, where it shifts from I'll hide my light under a candle and I'll hide my talents. No, I'm present. These are things that I can do. These are contributions I can make. And does that make sense? With the the sense of gifting. Grace means both emotional poise and gifting. And with that, then we have this positive expectation. We are contributing and we feel empowered. Where the other way, we felt distressed and discontented. Now we're feeling empowered. And we had chatted earlier about this and climbing that mountain.
Yeah, so when was it? August last year.
Yeah.
My first 14er, Tom was my guide. But as someone who suffers from fear of heights, which has stopped me from doing those types of things. So, I mean, it's a great example actually of this, of these dynamics, I think.
Yeah.
So,
So what happened was that we planned it, and you were excited and anticipation, and I'm going to do this and that sort of thing. We got to the trailhead. We're starting to hike. It's it's in the tree line still. There are trees and forest and that sort of thing. And you're just trekking along, and we're climbing that mountain. And the higher you got, and it was after we were above tree line. So there aren't the trees visually around. And now the vista is opening up, and we're not on a wide, flat area with trees around and a trail you're hiking on, but we're getting up into above tree line. There's rocks. We're more on the side of the mountain. And visually, what's changing, what you're observing, but what you're perceiving and how you're perceiving it is no longer safe. And it wasn't rewarding feeling secure and capable. It was rewarding feeling insecure and inadequate. And then that's when the phobia started kicking in, and the vertigo and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it just shifted. But literally, that was changing, even though the trail was marginally shifting moment by moment.
Yeah, so nothing had actually, my capability and my
safety and security,
none of that had actually changed.
Nope, not a bit.
But my perception of it had, because now the trees weren't surrounding us, and now it was open space. And instead of, so for me that, in my brain, like that sent me more into fight and flight, where I saw all of that as a threat. And in fact, because for me, it freezes. Like, it's a freezing at that point.
Yeah. And your mind was perceiving the hike and the climb differently than it had just a little while before.
Yeah.
I'm not safe now. I'm not secure, and I'm not capable. And then we stopped. You did some AHA for a bit, and that restored normal function. It shifted from the sympathetic flight or fight, and flying and fleeing wasn't really an option on the side of a mountain. And it shifted into rest, recover, relax.
You're safe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Literally nothing changed physically in your environment. We're still on the same place on the mountain, but what changed?
Well, just my perception of myself, really, that now it's okay, I'm safe, I'm not gonna fall off, nothing's I don't need to freeze, so it was just a shift in and also we talked about this before, because the very thing that kind of set me off, which is the vastness of the height, the vastness when what height brings when you climb up a mountain is this vastness, which for me was perceived as a threat. But when I shifted in homeostasis, now I'm in the place of gratitude, because I see it as, which is what most people see it as, of, oh my word, this is amazing and beautiful and like mind-blowing. So I wasn't able to enjoy that part at all because I was so focused on not dying.
Yes.
You know? So...
Falling headlong off the mountain.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it's a really important point because, you know, we can't always control our environment, you know, so we can't control, like I decided to climb up that mountain. So that's one thing. So I was in control of what I was doing.
It was an opportunity.
Yeah.
You always wanted to.
But not everyone's in that space. They can be in very dysfunctional places that are triggering all sorts of threat to well-being and all the rest of it. But, or, you know, like the family I mentioned at the beginning, you know, some people are just brought up in really great families that provide them with more security than the next person. And that's just what it is. But everyone at some point will find themselves in this kind of place of perceived threat to well-being.
Yep.
And it will kind of unless there's an intervention, it will send you into that fight and flight mode.
Yep.
But what you can do with AHA is like divert the track.
Yep.
You know, it literally is like 2 train tracks. And like we say, you can't control all of the situations that either make you secure or make you insecure or perceiving a threat. But at that point, when you are perceiving a threat, you can, through AHA, activate homeostasis that can actually send you on an entirely different track. And I think that's one of the most, you know, beneficial parts of AHA, you know, is to be able to, instead of live in a cycle of fight and flight or the tsunami of stress, actually continually make those choices for activating homeostasis to live in rational intimacy and live in that momentum where you actually get to be grateful because you've got a chance, because you're not so scared of life or whatever it is that's coming. Your mind isn't so full of the negative anticipation. So you have a chance to think in a thankful way, think in a present way. And the more you do that, the more secure you become. I mean, then we get into the cycle.
Positive expectation.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but I wanted to say that because, you know, life is interesting, Tom. You know, everyone has different cards dealt to them. And so it's not about, well, you're just secure, good for you. And the reality is that everyone's insecure at some point.
Of course.
But with AHA, Autonomic Healing Activation, we're able to stop that trajectory of fight and flight when we don't actually need it. We will need fight and flight every now and then. If we're in a jungle
there's
and there's
a
lion,
threat to well-being,
you need that thing kicking in.
Yeah.
But the majority of the time when we're in fight and flight, I think this is true to say, it is not real. Just like that mountain, it was not real. Nothing had changed.
No.
I was fine.
Yes. And then carried on up to the top. Enjoyed that amazing vista, seeing the other 14ers and being able to look down and see a ski resort and all the runs from the bird's eye view. And then when we started descending, where you'd previously had that vertigo and I'm not stable on the trail and that sort of thing.
Tom decided to take me down another challenging route of the mountain,
which there wasn't actually a trail. We were just freewheeling down the scree and just going down the side straight down the side of the mountain.
And the hilarious thing was, I think there were a couple of people behind us
who
were following us because they thought we knew where we were going. But Tom was just like, "Oh, let's do some fun
mountaineering." Yes. Yeah, I didn't realize people were actually following my lead, and they were just going down. And then they realized he's not on a trail. There is no trail here. We're blazing a trail. What? And then they bailed and went off to the sides to find the trail. But you didn't. Mm-hmm. You just kept going. And as far as the precariousness of your footing, it was hugely different than the stability of hiking on a well-packed trail, and you were just fine. Your feet were precarious on the scree, the loose rock, and you were fine. And we just carried on down until we actually hit where the actual trail did cross in front, and then we got on the trail. But you were just fine. Nothing had changed, and actually, in terms of the physical condition of your footing, it was much more precarious and way worse, but you were fine.
Yeah. And so we can take, I really hope our listeners can take that imagery, because it's such strong imagery, right, of going up a mountain and then coming down a mountain, and what's changing and what's not. But apply it to the situations that they find themselves in, because there are plenty of other mountains. And it might not be an actual mountain. It might be a relationship, or it might be a dynamic
career decisions.
Yeah, all sorts of stuff where you could be like me in that journey, where suddenly just you're sensing something's changed, and then you have a perceived threat to well-being, and it will send you into that fight or flight space. But with AHA, you can change that trajectory.
Yes.
You can activate homeostasis, normalize, and then allow your brain to send the right messages to the right nervous system.
Yes, and AHA, being able to activate homeostasis, which is what we're talking about, can supercharge that, can dramatically transform that. But just the sense of actually rational, this is the truth, this is authentic, and no, my feelings are about insecure and inadequate, and my emotions are all about that. But perceptions generate and are associated with emotions. The emotion may come first, and then we have a perception that is not actually rational. It's not it's not a truthful, realistic appraisal of the situation and the relationship. And so here's a shift that can help. If you've not done AHA or not, you just literally tell yourself, stop. Arrest the moment. Stop the momentum, and just literally tell yourself, stop. And then you ask yourself, what am I feeling? What emotions am I experiencing? And there's usually not just one, there's multiple ones. But ask yourself, what am I feeling? What am I experiencing emotionally? And then the next question you ask is that healthy? Because no matter whether you're sort of irrational or completely irrational about it, you can still tell whether what you're emotionally experiencing is healthy or unhealthy.
So then if you are, it's unhealthy, what is that the conclusion then is this isn't real?
Then the conclusion is I'm not thinking rationally about myself, others, and this situation. And if you take the first letter of those, it's SOS, and save our souls. And I am not rationally appraising this situation. I'm not rationally thinking about myself. What would be a more rational way to think about myself in this situation? What would be a more loving? What would be a more truthful? And that allows then a shift from the sympathetic flight or fight into the hypothalamus, and I'm okay, and I'm secure, and I am capable, and then reinforce that. Yeah.
That's so important. And I think I've noticed that with some of the perceptions that I have. One of them is something we call love me tender, which is a seemingly rational perception. Love me tender is based on people pleasing, needs of approval, affirmation, all of that stuff. And super needy of it. And when you're not getting it, everything's all over the place.
You are insecure and incapable, and I'm not okay, and Yeah.
Now, the actual rational perception of that, the alternative, is to be loving.
Yes.
Which I think is awesome. It's like the opposite of that. And Tom, what I found myself doing now, more and more so, is that I can identify when I'm in it pretty quickly, and I literally tell myself, "You're in love me tender, Ruth. Stop it.
Yeah.
Stop it." And then I don't always ask myself about the healthy emotion, but I think I'll start doing that. But then I start telling myself, what does it look like to be loving right now?
Yes.
And I ask myself, I coach myself into the actual rational alternative. And I found that to be so helpful because it gives you a focus of, it's almost like you are literally swinging your brain in another direction.
And you literally are.
And it gives you a focus of, well, what does this look like to be loving? What do I believe is loving in this situation? So that's been super helpful for me.
And then you climb a mountain and you enjoy the climb, and we are all climbing mountains. And there are many journeys and trails that we follow. We can enjoy that.
Yeah.
Does that mean it's going to be a pleasant hike? Physically challenging to climb a 14er, but
absolutely
worth the effort and to have that accomplishment. Absolutely. And that's where we can have that positive expectation that comes from feeling secure and capable, and we're empowered because we're the ones empowering ourselves.
So good, Tom. Well, thanks so much for this conversation. I think there's so much in it, and look forward to our next episode together.
Yep. You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.